Why does this channel exist? Hi, my name is Moritz Lembert, and today I'm going to share the backstory for me making those videos. So hopefully it gives you some context and makes you want to listen to some of the videos that we're putting out on the channel. How I'm sitting here in Switzerland, making videos for YouTube, talking about mind, performance, work. How that all came to be, I would say really started when I was born, and then there's some key points that happened throughout my life that led to me doing this work today. One of the things that happened in my life quite early on that made me really curious about consciousness, about how my own mind worked, was an experience that I had when I was 10 years old. I was going to a school that was quite different to the normal school. We didn't have the normal path of education where you get noted on your knowledge, you have to do tests all the time, you get graded against your classmates and so forth. But I was going to a school that had at the premise, like the core premise of the school was that children knew how to learn, and you as the adults just have the responsibility to create an environment that allows for learning. And that was the school that I was going to. And in that school, there was something that went on where you only had two areas. One area was kids prior to 10 years old. And by the way, I'm making a long preamble here, but you're gonna get to some interesting insights throughout the story about my life and why I'm doing those videos. So stick around. There were two areas in the school. We had all the kids prior to 10 years old, and then we had an area that was only accessible for the kids above 10 years old. And when I was getting to 10, all my friends were older than me. They all had the chance to go to the area that was only accessible for kids older than 10 years old. And I was one of them. So I couldn't go up there. All my friends went up, and I was stuck with the smaller kids. And I really did not like that. I experienced at the time a little crisis of meaning already. I think now when thinking back, that was my first crisis of meaning. And I became an observer. I started to try to figure out my experience and my own feelings. Feeling like alone, feeling slightly rejected, and I became very conscious of what was going on around me. I think I have been that way before, but that really amplified it. I always love to observe nature and animals and insects and all the small things going on and big things going on. My fascination before 10 years old was primarily nature, very little human fascination at the time. But there I became interested, and I realized a couple of things. I realized that at the time, my friends went up and they spent a lot of time together, and I wasn't in that group anymore. And I realized that our social friendships mostly are given by the context that we're in. Because when I left that context, there was more separation between me and my friends. And it was not to judge that and not to say, oh, they were bad friends or anything. But given the nature of us, I realized that a lot of the social constructs that I was so believing in before were just given by circumstance. And I realized that quite young. I had an insight into that quite young. I also realized that most of the games that people played around me, other children and what they were curious about and interested in, I started to question them. Like, I could see that there were games going on for status, games going on for belonging, games going on for trying to win the approval of others. And I spent a lot of time in that age until I was old enough to go up, contemplating, because my friends were not there. I think I had one friend that stuck around. We spent quite some time with each other, but when I didn't, I didn't want to play the games of the other children. So I was thrown back at myself. And that was, I think, a shaping experience. Then it went on, and when I went out of school and I went to a concert at the concert, there was a rock and roll concert. A friend of mine took me there. And when they stopped playing after the concert, a DJ came on and he played some drum and bass music. And at the time, I was about 14 years old. I didn't really know what I wanted to do after primary school and after the first 9 school years that you have in Austria. By the way, I'm from Austria, Vienna originally. So I went there and I stand there, right? My friends all go to take something to drink. And I'm standing on the dance floor and this guy starts playing electronic music, drum and bass. And I didn't really know drum and bass at the time. And there was something that happened in that moment that makes sense to me in retrospect by looking at it again. When the guy was playing the music, I stopped being in my thoughts. I stopped being so engaged with my thinking process. And instead, I became available to the music. What do I mean by that? I just started dancing. And I started dancing and moving so intensely that a crowd of people formed and they started cheering me on. And it was the first time really dancing in my life. I didn't have any, or maybe I had 1 or 2 prior dance experiences or so. And I experienced a level of freedom that I didn't have before that. I experienced freedom from all this mental chatter, this who I think I am and what I think I need to do and should do. And I was really present in the moment. And I think that experience shaped why I became a dancer after that. Like after that experience, I was curious about dancing and then found dance classes in Vienna at the time. I was living outside of Vienna by then. Dance classes, traveled every week there, did some break dance and hip hop dance and studying dance, and then later on decided to become a dancer out of what I had experienced when I was dancing. And I didn't have yet the understanding that it had nothing to do with dancing, but it had to do with the state of mind that was created in that moment, or to say it in another way, the absence of my internal narrative running and just being present there. So I became a dancer. I went on and studied dance and movement and all sorts of dance. I think I studied around 30, 35 different styles of dance, some very little, some very extensively, like hip hop dance and some ballet training that I had, and some especially break dance and popping and so forth. And I went on, I did some shows, I went then to theater, and in that process I realized that there was a distinction between skill and practice and this state that I had experienced when I was 14 years old. And I had several experiences like that in dance following those years, where I experienced this total being present. Or when I was performing, I could perform and I could do all the right movements, and it didn't reach the audience in the same way. And then there were moments when you might not even do the movement perfectly, but there is a state of presence where the audience is just totally encapsulated. And I think you know that when you look in your own experience. You've seen people who are highly skilled at something, but it doesn't fascinate you. And sometimes you see a child moving and it just does whatever it does, right? And maybe you see a child dancing, or you see a child playing or laughing, and it is so free that for a moment you become free. For a moment it totally takes you in. So went on, studied more dance, and I became fascinated by that state. I was curious about how can one practice being in that state. And I became more and more certain about it not being a function of just practice, because I've seen people who practice tons, who had way more practice than I did, and they did not access that state. And I saw people who had sometimes less practice than I had, and I saw them getting to the state of presence. So that was my fascination. And then a couple other things happened. I met a guy from Brazil, and he was doing a practice that was all about letting go of resistance. And the premise of the practice was that we are always building tension and resistance in the physical body, no matter what we're engaging with. When we do a movement and we're grabbing something and we let that something go, we keep a residue, we keep an echo of that tension in the body, usually. We're totally unaware of doing that unless we practice becoming conscious of that. And I became totally fascinated by that practice and became one of the facilitators of that practice. Traveled around, followed that Brazilian guy who was doing workshops in Europe, and then I became, for a time, a teacher of that practice myself and shared that practice. The name of the guy is Bruno Caverna. He's still doing work, and it's fascinating work. And I was doing that, and what I noticed there was that when we wanted to go, the goal, so to say, of the practice was to live in a state of allowance, living in a state of falling. The metaphor was we're always falling. Gravity's always working on us. Always, always, always. If there wouldn't be a ground, you would be falling, right? But we resist the fall in life. And it's a great metaphor for life in general. Your life is going. You can say, I don't want it to go. I want it to stop, but it does not stop, right? It doesn't listen to you resisting it. It continues going, flowing. And we inquired into that in that physical practice. So what I noticed in the practice was that what was usually getting in the way of a participant, somebody that we were working with, a student, getting to that state of allowance was not any physical limitation. It was not something that their body was incapable of. It was not that the tension that they held couldn't be let go of physically. It was not a physical limitation. It was a limitation in their mind. It was a limitation in them doing a mental holding on to something. And I saw, and I mean, I could do another video on that, so many things that we do mentally that lead to tension and lead to an inability to allow. One is being control, right? When we try to get it right, to do it exactly right, when that's the mental focus, you will create tension. When you're worried about how it looks, what the facilitator thinks about you, what the partner you're working with thinks about you, you will not be able to access that state of allowing. And that became obvious to me. And I realized how much in my life I was holding, how much I was mentally trying to control how life goes, how it flows, and how my body works. And that practice, like practicing that physically and then being in exchange with other people, it had a tremendous effect on my living life. I realized that it was, I still got triggered and angry and stuff like that, but it was getting less. It was getting less at the time. And I had some really intense experiences of relationship failing, falling in love with somebody who was not able to commit to a relationship. Like, I had immense emotional pain that I went through in that time. And always when I was met with trying to shove it away, resisting that, or ignoring the pain, I realized that I was doing that thing in my mind that I had observed in practice, which was creating resistance and tension against what was going on. And for whatever reason, I realized that that's not what I wanted to do in my life. I wanted to allow those things and learn from them. And that's what I did. In that period, there were a couple of things going on. My relationship with that teacher, my mentor, was going apart, different directions, different reasons for that. Then that woman that I was deeply in love with, that relationship started to break at points again, even though it was never full. And I was going through that, and I also had experienced in my body problems with performing and the work of a dancer. And I was dancing a lot, I was climbing a lot at the time, and I started to experience constant pains in my body. I had inflammations in my shoulders and elbow, and I damaged my capsula in the joints and damaged a couple of things, which is, dancing is a high intensity sport. If you do that professionally, it's really extreme sports in a way. You're burning sometimes up to 5,000-6,000 calories in a day doing that work. I experienced that failure of my body, and for the first time the question arose, maybe I'm not wanting to do dance for the rest of my life. Like, what else would I do? And that that together with where will this relationship go? Where will my relationship to my teacher go? Will I stay part of that community that I had grown a part of? And some other questions that popped up. And some of the questions that popped up in my mind were, what the fuck is life? What am I? Right? And I was looking at myself, what am I? Like, am I a dancer? What does that mean? Dancer is an idea, right? And I didn't find a ground to that idea. And when I looked at what life was, I saw what we were doing. We had those relationships that mostly I figured were about fulfilling your own needs, right? That's what we humans do. We have relationships based on needs and wants, right? Like if I like something and you like that as well, right? It gives me a good feeling, and we might have a relationship with each other. We become friends, and in the moment that you start disagreeing with my views, we most likely we don't stay friends, right? We start drifting apart because I realized I was so busy preserving my identity, and I didn't even know what my identity was. I had no idea. I had ideas, but actually I had no idea. I had ideas, but I had no experience of what I truly was. And that threw me into a deep, you could even say despair of looking for meaning, purpose, and an answer to my question. And I awoke every day with a mind that was full of those questions and a total inability to enjoy living because I needed an answer, right? I so craved an answer to it. Fast forward, I was about 4 or 5 months that I spent in that state, questioning. And maybe a preamble to this, I discovered philosophy and interest in psychology when I was about 12 years old, I think, maybe a little older. And that interest was always a side interest. And sometimes I did have a thought, maybe becoming a psychotherapist later, especially when I was around 20 or so. That thought popped up, but then I always said, no, I'm a dancer, right? Anyhow, I'm in a club. It's New Year's Eve. I'm feeling absolutely no joy. I have questions in my mind. My friends took me there. One of my best friends took me there. And I was in a conversation with a woman. And while I was in a conversation with her, I looked at the absolute meaninglessness of that conversation in the face of my existential questioning. And in that moment, I had a tremendous insight into the workings of my mind. I can't tell you if it was 2 seconds, if it was a millisecond, if it was 20 seconds, I have no idea. But suddenly I became luminously aware of my thoughts and how my thoughts had created my whole life, and how everything I was experiencing was painted and shaped by my thoughts, and that there was no other way than feeling how I was feeling based on my thoughts. And I had this insight, like it said, I'd read or heard that biology reacts to the environment that we're in. If you're in an environment that's hostile or threatening, you create fear. Your body creates fear. But I realized that I never ever experienced any environment outside of my own mind and thought. Ever. I did not experience the world. I only ever experienced my own mind. Ever. There was nothing outside of it. My whole life was memory. And right now, when you're looking at your experience, where is that experience? You might have a concept about it's in the brain, or you might have a concept that says it's happening in Switzerland, in this area, in this apartment right now, and I'm seeing this apartment. But where is it that you're seeing? You then have a concept, right? You learned that you're seeing it through your eyes, and then your brain processes it and so forth. But if you let concepts aside and you go to your direct experience, you realize you never, ever, ever experienced anything outside of your own mind. And I saw that so clearly in that moment. I realized a couple of things in that moment. I realized that life in itself had no inherent meaning. There was no purpose out there that I could grab, and that was my purpose. Somebody gave me purpose from the outside. That was impossible because there was nothing outside of my mind. This conversation right now, me sharing this, you watching this video, where does it happen? It happens in you. You can say like, no, I mean, it doesn't happen in my body here, right? But even that experience, where is it? Where is that happening? I know you love science and concepts and explanations that you've gathered, but you gathered them where? You see, there's no outside, truly. But anyhow, you don't have to believe me. I would encourage you to inquire into that instead. I realized that purpose was only there when I said it was there. Whatever, even if you give me a purpose now, you come to me and say like, Moritz, this is your life's purpose. It will only have meaning in my life and be my life purpose when I say so, when I say it in my mind or say it out loud. Only then, right? I can tell you what I'm telling you right now, and you can say in your mind, that's absolute bullshit. There's no truth in what he's sharing. So then it's not true. But when you go and you say, that is absolutely true, it is true, as long as it's true in your mind. I mean, I'm still blown away by that. It's so incredible. The implications of that are incredible, but it's for you to discover that. I realized that when I kept thinking the same thoughts, I would create the same experience. This insight, like, as I said, I was in an intense crisis of meaning and experiencing something you could say was a depression or so. And in that moment of insight, it was all blown away. And I was totally happy. I was so thrilled and excited by that discovery. And I remember when I went home and I went to bed, I had the thought of like, I hope tomorrow I'm going to remember this. And then I realized how that thought created another tension and fear in my body. And I let that thought go and I went to bed and I slept. And I awoke the next day and I felt the same. I still saw it. And I was showering and another thought occurred like, yeah, but you haven't figured out what to do now. And I could feel tension coming and I could feel same thoughts coming back. And in that moment, instead of paying attention to that, I just went to the glass walls of the shower, started painting hearts into the steam on the shower and the glass, right? And I had another big insight in that moment. I realized I did not have to pay attention to all my thoughts. If one thought did not create anything that I wanted in my life, I could simply let it be. Fast forward, I became intensely interested in meditation. I started meditating like 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 6 hours in a day, sometimes 1 hour. And different teachers. I listened to Joe Dispenza, I listened to Raman Maharshi, I discovered Alan Watts, I listened a lot. I listened to Ram Dass, to all the big teachers, and they said something along the lines of what I had discovered, and I realized, wow, I'm not the only one, right? I'm not the only one discovering that. There were other people who said the same thing. What happened after that was that I met somebody again. I knew that person before, and I shared about that I'm in the process of figuring out where I wanted to take my life. And she offered me coaching. She said, Moritz, that's cool. What you're interested in right now, I'm a coach, I'm a trained coach, and I can help you with that questioning, right? Maybe I can be of service to you. You helped me a couple of times. I want to gift you that. I said, wow, that's wonderful. So she gifted me 2-3 sessions. And I think second or third session, right, I started out sharing about the problems with where I wanted to go. And she asked me questions that led me away from the problems and towards what I actually wanted. And when she was doing that with me, I realized the genius of that approach, right? So far, my study of psychology and so forth was usually you spend time figuring out the problem. Now I was talking to a person that spent no time figuring out the problem, but instead she was pointing me towards possibility. And it totally opened my experience. And second or third session with her, I said, I know exactly what I want to do. I want to learn what you do. And I want to do that with other people. And I want to share the insights that I got in that moment with other people. So I found a training. It was in Berlin. It was an American institute, but they had a training in Berlin. And at the time, as a dancer, I had very little money. I had no money. I think at the time I discovered that training, I had like $300 on the bank or so, and it cost 11,500. And I had to figure out a way to do that training. And I realized something else in that moment. I was just committed to doing that training. And I had no idea how I would do it, but I was committed. So every day I looked into possibilities to create that money. And fast forward 3.5 months, I had the money to do the training. Went there, did it. Was at the time one of the best experiences of my life. I remember the first module, the trainer that I'm still, Nina, if you're watching this, I do so appreciate you. She wrote on the board, and this just stayed in my mind. She wrote on the board, I am. Everything following that statement might be true, but it's not the truth. I don't know if you find that as profoundly as I found that, but it kept being true, that statement, in my life. And 7 years later, it still is true in my life, or seems true at least, that whatever we grab usually is something that can be true. Yeah, it could be true, but it's not that truth, because truth is not a concept. Truth is not your opinion. Truth is fundamental, is absolute, and is infinite. But more to that later in another episode. Anyhow, so I'm going along, becoming a coach, starting to train people, have some coaching sessions, still doing dance. I had also trained to become a massage practitioner, and I had some massage clients and so forth. Was working in a restaurant. I did a lot of things at that time. And a year passed, and about a year later, again, I'm in a club. In almost a year, a little over a year. It was a year and 3 weeks that experience occurred. And I'm standing on the dance floor, and I fell in love with techno music in that time. So I went and did some long nights in the club. And I'm standing on the dance floor, and I'm dancing. And while I was dancing, I had a sentence that just kept repeating in my mind, relax. I kept telling myself, relax. For whatever reason, that thought occurred. And I realized that I could relax very deeply. And I was dancing, and I was moving, and I relaxed more, and I relaxed more, and I relaxed more, and more. And I'm getting goosebumps even thinking about it. And I relaxed until the moment that I felt as if I was falling backwards. I did fall, but I didn't hit the ground. Because what occurred was that and it was as vivid as this video is for you right now, or as the camera appears to me. I saw my whole experience. Like right now, you're seeing the room or wherever you're seated. Maybe you're outdoors and you have this bubble of experience, a bubble of reality. What happened to me was I fell out of it. And I don't give you an explanation for what occurred. I just share what occurred and why it made me so curious about consciousness and this work and what I do today. And I fell out of the experience, and I saw my body there. I saw the whole room. I saw people dancing, and I was going further and further and further and further away from it. In that moment that occurred, I had instant knowing of, I would say, 3 things. 1, I realized that I was not the experience that I thought I was. I was not the body. I could see my own body standing there. I could see other people. I could see everything. And it was as if I was drifting further and further away, and I saw it. And I realized I wasn't that. I also realized absolute peace. Or you could say there was an absolute absence of any tension. was no tension. There was peace to, I can't describe what it was. It was so profound. And I had this sense of turning around to see where all of that was coming from. And it was looking like as if streams were going into that what right now is your experience, forming that experience. As if, I don't know, like, oh, I mean, it all sounds fantastical, right? And the only thing I have to prove it to you is telling you that that's exactly what I experienced. And it was as if streams of thought or liquid went into the experience, building the experience. And I was curious, looking away, like looking where was all of that coming from? And I saw nothing. I saw something and it was nothing. And I realized that I was that I wasn't the body, that it wasn't the experience, that it wasn't my thoughts, that I was, and that's the way that I tried to then explain it to my friends when I came back to being dancing in the club. I said, we usually experience reality and we think we are what the light is shining on. And I'm taking light as a metaphor here. But we are not that which the light is shining on. It's just as if you take a flashlight and you go into a dark room and you put the flashlight on and you see a part of that room. And we usually think we are that which we see. And I said, we are not that, nor are we the flashlight. We are the one holding the light. And where we shine the light, the world appears. You might have a sense of recognition of what I just said. You might have resistance to what I just said. I don't know, right? You might have any experience. But here's what happened to me after that. After that, I became even more curious about what the hell is going on. And I spent months and years trying to get back to that experience and trying to make sense of that experience. Because when I went back to the world, that was really not how people look at the world, right? People don't assume that reality is anything else but material. They assume they are their body. Life works the way that it's presented to them, and that nothing else than what's already discovered as possible is possible. That's how people live life. And I couldn't, and I still can't, buy into that idea of the world because of that experience. And I say, if I wouldn't have had that experience, I would exactly function like everybody else. And it's not about me being special. I'm just sharing something here in the hopes that it gives you perspective and interest and curiosity and leads you to inquire into what you think is real. So fast forward to today, many other experiences like that, many as them looking into certain traditions and practices. They say it's called an awakening and enlightenment and whatever. And I had other people describe similar things to me or when I read it. But I don't really care about whatever label it is. It just gave me this profound curiosity for what is reality and what is it that we are. How come that things function the way we think they function, and do they really? What's actually possible in life? I continued that journey being a coach. I have my own inquiry, and then I have clients that come to me and we question together what they assume is real. And I've seen absolutely mind-blowing transformations in people where what they thought were certain things, like real things in their life, just disappeared and vanished. And instead, they're creating businesses, they're creating new relationships, they're creating profound sense of peace where before there was anxiety and all sorts of things that do not make sense in a lot of the traditional paradigms that we are living in. That journey continues. Like, as I said, after that moment, there were other profound moments for me where I saw deeper and deeper and deeper into that moment, into that insight. And I won't give you an explanation for what life is or what I am or what you are, because I don't know. I have ideas about it. I have experiences that point to things, but what I can say is that I found incredible richness, joy, and value in questioning my assumptions about life, in questioning my beliefs, in questioning what everybody seems to agree on is so, and to discover how little I actually know for certain. And it goes back to the statement in my coach training, the first one that I had. I am. Everything might be the truth, might be true, but it's not the truth. Yeah, and that led me here, doing those videos, having experiences that challenge traditional paradigms, exploring what's possible for people. Personally, I love the world of business. I love exploring the body. I love exploring the mind. Did a lot of different meditation practices, work with different teachers, having a mentor right now, amazing human being, many people that influenced my understanding of the matter. And the thing that I'm most curious about is consciousness, is our ability to know anything, and that there is anything, and that you are experiencing right now, and how profound and amazing that truly is, and how stupid we as human beings can be in creating misery out of that incredible experience of being alive. So thank you if you watched until here. As I said, I like to go deep and contemplate on things, and I thought it might make sense to share my journey and give you some context on why I'm making those videos. And my wish for the channel is to keep exploring together with you. I have coaching service that I offer. There is retreats and seminars that we do. So I will mention them in some of the videos, but mostly I will share and explore together with you and share things that I found being true by going deep into the question of self. I'm Moritz Lembert. It's my YouTube channel. Like and subscribe, and I see you hopefully on the next one. And don't believe anything I say. Look for yourself. Have some inquiry going. See you on the next one.